All right, we're in Genesis chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 1 through 9. So when you get there, could I have somebody read verses 1 through 9, and then we'll do a bit of a recap, and we'll discuss some of these things. We'll talk about the text here. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. Who would like to do that? You'll do it? All right, thank you.
The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out for Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in the Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh, and I don't like that.
You're good. Go ahead.
At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel, and pitched his tent in Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward Negev.
The Negev?
Negev.
Yeah. Thank you. Good job. Yeah, don't worry too much about the names and all that kind of stuff. Just if you go fast enough, pretend like you know what you're talking about. Everybody will be like, oh, that's how you pronounce that. Yeah, that's an interesting pronunciation. I didn't know that. Just say, yeah, I studied Hebrew. We're good. All right. So tell me a bit about Abram's lineage, his family tree. Where do we trace Abraham back to? Who's his ancestor all the way back? Well, he's from Ur of the Chaldeans. Where? Shem. Okay, start way back. Who's the first one in his line? Adam. Yeah, trick question. Adam. So you've got we trace all the way back from Adam up to who do we trace through? Adam to, think about the flood. Adam to Noah. Thank you. The guy who was out of the room and knows, or is a good guess, one or the other.
It was a good guess.
Yeah, he was guessing, right? So Adam to Noah, and then we've got Noah to Shem. Right? We got Noah to Shem, and then Shem to Terah. So there's a brief recap of this history that's going through. So we've got Terah. Terah is the father of Abram. And we see that, as Gail had pointed out, Abram is born where? He's born in the Ur of the Chaldees. And what do we know about that kind of area? We know what do you know?
It was idolatrous, wasn't it?
It's definitely idolatrous, absolutely.
Well developed, I had read.
Yeah. It's a developed cultural kind of place, absolutely. Cities and things along those lines, what we would call cities maybe back then. What does the area, Ur of the Chaldees, what does it become later on in history?
Babylon.
It becomes Babylon. Yeah, so it's pagan, and it eventually becomes Babylon. We also get the idea from the genealogy of Abram and Terah's children that Abram is the most important out of the three children. Why do we assume that? Why do we kind of think that? Or why do I think that? You might not think that, but why do I suggest that? Why do I think that?
Well, one of the brothers died.
One died, that's true. Yeah.
And Abram's the one that's mentioned
Yeah.
over and over and over. I mean, it kind of follows his story.
That's right. Abram's mentioned, but he's also mentioned first, right? And does anybody remember last week we talked about this? Why is it impossible that Abraham Abraham is the firstborn of Terah. He's mentioned first, and we might think off the top of our heads, oh, he's firstborn, that's why he's mentioned first. Why is that impossible if you hold to the inerrancy and infallibility of the scriptures? Anybody remember? We talked about it.
We're talking about it, but I don't.
The math doesn't add up. Yeah, the math doesn't.
The math doesn't add up because it says that Terah began to have children, is the idea, when he was it 75 years old. And then it says he had Abram and Nahor and Haran. But we looked at a couple of texts. We looked at one in Acts, and we looked at in Genesis here. It says that Abram left Haran when he was 75. And the Acts text tells us that he left after his father died in Haran. And his father died when he was 230, right? What's that? 205, sorry. 205. And so if you look at the math, Abram would have had to have been born when he was 100, when Terah was 130. Okay? So he's mentioned first in the genealogy, right? In the list of the genealogy. And we know he can't be the firstborn because of the math doesn't work out. It's there to emphasize Abram's going to be the guy that we're going to be talking about. And then we saw, as Kimberly, as you mentioned, he's mentioned over and over again. This is where the story picks up. So that's one of those things that we have to think about when we look at these genealogies as well. So keep that in your mind too when you're looking at other genealogies and it names a number of people. And it may not be that the first one named is the firstborn. It may have to do with superiority or supremacy in some form or fashion, importance, something like that. So we saw that he should be considered the most important. The story moves now from him. It's going to be talking about him and his life. So how does this section start? How does chapter 12, how does it begin? How does it start? What's it start with?
It starts with the Lord's talking to Abram.
Yeah, the Lord talks to Abram. And what is he telling Abram? What is this conversation? What's he have with him? What's he saying?
Go.
He says, go, right? Leave. And what is Abram to leave?
Virtually everything.
Yeah.
His
Yes.
home, his family, his land.
That's right, everything. And he's told to leave absolutely everything. So it's all the attachments, right? Now, we've talked about this last week, but it's important that some things are worth reiterating and restating and rethinking about. And I think this is a big one. He was called to leave absolutely everything, all of his attachments, that is, anyways. Now, we know he was a wealthy man. We know he had lots of servants, and some of his family go with him. But this is meant to be this break with the past, with the history, with the land, with any inheritance that he was to have in the land or anything like that. His future, he's to make a complete break of all of that. And what is he promised if he goes? If he does as God has commanded? If he goes as God has called him?
Great nation.
He's going to be a great nation.
He'll be blessed.
He's going to be blessed. Absolutely. And why would that be interesting or important to Abram that he's going to have, he's going to be like the father of nations, a multitude.
Yeah, he has no children.
He has no children, and
Sarah's barren. Yeah.
and Sarai is barren. She's unable to have children. So if he stays in the land, if he stays and doesn't go, what does he get? Right. His life is as good as dead in a sense, right? At least as the lineage goes on. And back then, were children and someone's lineage, especially going forward, was that important?
Extremely.
Yeah. It was more important than a lot of things we think of today. It was super, super important. And in fact, later on, Abraham laments. He cries out to God, and he's worried. He doesn't have an heir. He doesn't have an offspring, right? And he says, my servant is going to take all my possessions. So we see that having children and looking for the future That was an important thing. But he's called to break everything. God says, if you go, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you. There's going to be all kinds of things. You're going to have far more than you ever could have had on your own staying here, right? I mean, there's the choice, is kind of come and follow me and I will promise you all of this, or stay and you can have nothing, right? You can pretty much have what you have, and that's about it. There's no real advantage there. It's pretty much nothing. How difficult do you think it is, though, the call of God on Abraham's life? How difficult do you think it was for him, even with the promise, even with the blessing? Did God call Abraham and tell him, all right, Abraham, listen, I want you to follow me, but I want you to go to Canaan, and I want you to take this route. It's going to take this long, and when you get in the land, you're going to do this. And did God lay everything out for him? No. What did God say to him? Just get up and go, right? He didn't tell him where, right? We know he leaves not even knowing where he was going to go. You're told that. He just get up and go. So how difficult is that to do? What would you do if God called you to leave everything behind to travel to an unknown place? Would it be difficult?
I'd ask me if I had another choice.
We might, right? Or we might have a conversation with him, like, okay, God, you want me to go. Can you tell me how long is the trip going to be? And that's a reasonable question, right? If somebody said, hey, can I get a ride? I would say, sure, where are you going? Right? I wouldn't be less, oh, don't worry. What do you mean, don't worry? Where do you need a ride to? Mike is okay with that. I'm not. I kind of want to know, is this going to be, is this trip going to be a day trip? God doesn't tell, God, is this going to be a 24-hour trip? Like, is it going to take me a day to walk there? Remember, they're walking, right? Especially with the cattle and all that. They might even be riding on donkeys or horses or some camels or whatever. But they're not going very fast, right? 3-5 miles an hour, something like that. They're kind of traipsing along. So is this going to be a day journey that I'll walk a day? Or is it going to be a week or a month? How long am I going to be traveling? And God doesn't tell him. But also, do we get any indication that Abram asked anything? Not in there that says that. I'd be asking. I'd be like, Richard, hey, can I get some more information here? But he doesn't ask. So I think it's a difficult thing. He didn't know where he was going. It's a difficult call. Do you think it would have been easier if God would have mentioned where he was going? If God gave him,
I think.
yeah.
The unknown is very scary, I think.
I would agree with you. Anybody? I think the unknown, right? I think it would have been probably easier for me, right? If I'm in Abram's shoes, and that's really what I'm asking you to think about, because the text really doesn't say, but I think it was a hard decision. I think it was a tough thing. But if God would have said, I want you to go to Canaan, it's going to take this long, and when you get there, I want you to do these things. Because he didn't even tell him what to do when he gets wherever he's going.
How do you know when to stop?
What's that?
And how do you know when to stop?
That's right. When will I know when I've got there? Well, don't worry about it. I'll let you know. Okay. That kind of thing is difficult. It's like...
Well, wouldn't it be like a show of faith on Abram? He just does
It is.
exactly because he has the faith the Lord is going to take him.
That's
where
right.
He wants him and use him however.
That's right. That's exactly what it is, right? And this is one of the reasons we look at Abram as a man of faith, the father of the faith. We look back to him because he does these kind of things that you have to go on faith, that you're going to go where God leads. Still a difficult kind of challenge, but God doesn't say, this is where you're going, this is how long you're going to stay or anything like that. And I think the fear of the unknown or the questioning makes it difficult. Again, it adds more of a challenge to it. And again, it looks good for Abram. Abram is truly relying. He's truly putting his faith in God because he has no information, right? That's why we're laboring this point. He has no information whatsoever. And he's going to get up and he's going to go. So Abram, does he stay or does he go? What does he do? He goes. He goes by faith. So that tells us that he is a man of faith. Just for your information, the journey from Haran to Canaan is about 400 miles. The average walking pace is like 3 to 4 miles. Humans walk about 3 or 4 miles. So you're looking at about 25 to 33, 36 hours of walking, something along those lines. And again, as I already mentioned, he would have had animals and things like that. So he wasn't walking 5 miles an hour straight for 24 hours. This would have been a long journey. This is a long walk. You would have had to stop, you feed your animals, you water them, so this would have been days. How many days, we don't know, but he's walking about 400 miles. And that's just from Haran, which is further up and over. Remember, he comes from Ur of the Chaldees. I looked at some numbers, it says something like 1,000 miles that he's traveling pretty much on foot. He doesn't have a car or anything like that. He's traveling, it's a slow go, but he's going. And it's about 400 miles from Haran. So another thing to think about, just for your information, is how many calls does Abram get to go?
What was the question?
How many calls? God comes to Abram how many times? It's twice. Somebody go to Acts for me. Who would like to go to Acts? Raise your hand. All right, Sarah's going to go. Nope, sorry, Mike. Sorry. You got to be quicker than that. She gets a star. Acts. It's a good class. Everybody's wanting to do. Acts chapter 7, verses 2 to 3. Acts chapter 7, verses 2 and 3.
Then he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and he said to him, Depart from your country and your relatives and come to the land that I will show you."
All right, good enough. Did you catch that? You see what it says? Does it say before he lived in Haran? Before he lived in Haran. And in Genesis 12, it talks about when he was in Haran, right? So Abram gets 2 calls. One call is when he's in Ur of the Chaldees, or your translation said Mesopotamia, I think it said, which is the same area. So he gets one call there, and then he gets a second call when he's up in Haran. Why do you think, and again, this is speculation, but, don't base your doctrine off of this, but why do you think he got the second call? Why possibly might he have gotten a second call? He got the first call to leave, and he went, but they stop in Haran. Why do you think he might have gotten the second call?
He went where God wanted him.
Could be, yeah. Could be.
And when he was in Haran, he still had, apparently his father and everybody was still there with him at that point.
That's right.
It appears.
That's right.
So this time he's leaving all of that behind.
Yeah, and his father dies in, where does he die? In Haran, sorry. He dies in Haran. It could be, maybe he was thinking, this is the place I need to stop. That could be. Could be they've traveled so far and they start to put down roots. His father dies there and all, It could be that he needed that second. We're not there yet, Abram. We don't really know, but we know he got a second call. He's called again to keep moving. So for whatever reason, God came to him a second time and said, it's time to go. But now you know, right? Bible trivia, if you want to impress people, we can say, Abram had 2 calls.
Where is it, James, that where Paul quotes in Romans that, and he believed and God counted to him for righteousness? Where that was a point where Abraham seemed to have, Paul saw that as
He believed God and God accounted it to him as
What
righteousness.
appearance was that
I believe that's when he gives him the circumcision, the covenant of circumcision, and God promised him a child and all of that. I think that's where that is. I'd have to look. But I know James quotes a different section. I believe James quotes where Abraham offers his son Isaac and all of that. So James quotes one or alludes to one section, Paul goes to the other. But I believe it's the covenant. One of the covenants that God says you're going to have an heir, you're going to have an offspring, don't worry about it, I'm going to bless you. And it says he believed God and God counted that for him.
The second appearance, or?
Well, yeah, from this point on, this would be after this.
After that.
After
Okay.
this, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I just was trying to get that in my...
No, that's right. I believe it's after this. We'd have to, good question. I'd have to double check, but I believe it's after this period of time. All right, so let me ask you this. How does this story, just what we've kind of looked at so far, how does this relate to us today? What might we be able to get out of this story?
Not to be tied down to the earthly things of the world and be ready to do God's work when he calls.
Okay, not to be tied down, absolutely. We sing a hymn, "This world is not my home." Jesus talked about laying up your treasures in heaven, where neither rust nor moth and all that, where your treasure is, there your heart is, that kind of thing. We know that Abram and the rest of the patriarchs felt the same way, because it talks about they were waiting. They were waiting for a place.
I think faith is a journey. We keep on believing.
Okay.
We come to believe again when we see more and more evidence of God. We've already believed and still believe, but certain things happen that causes us to reaffirm our belief. And it's kind of like a journey, where Abraham grows in faith.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a journey. Do we have a similar call when the gospel message comes to a person? When the death, the burial, the resurrection, when the gospel comes to a person who's not in Christ, what are they called to? What are they called to leave? They're called to leave sin, absolutely. Is it a similar call that Abram gets? It's not the physical, but think about just the kind of the concept. Abram was to leave what behind? We already said it. What is it? Everything. Everything behind. When we come to Christ, we're to leave everything behind. In fact, we're told that the old is gone, the new is come, right? We're all death, burial, and resurrection. We reenact that when we're immersed into Christ. We're new creations. We're new creatures. We're to leave everything behind. What does Jesus say about a person who will not place him above everyone else in their life? The person who will not put Jesus number one. What does he say about a person?
He's not worthy of it.
Not worthy. So what is Jesus calling us to? Put him above everything else, right? So in a sense, we're to sever all of that for Jesus. Nothing and no one is beyond him, is above him. So in a sense, it's leave your country, leave your father's household, leave your lineage, leave all of who you were before, and now embrace me. Do we have a journey? Now, you talked about a faith journey. That's true. Are we wandering pilgrims? Are we on our way to a promised land?
We are pilgrims, yes.
Are we wandering? Are we heading? Are we journeying to a land?
Yes.
What's the land? It's glory, right? We're on our way. So we are journeying just like him. When we answer the call, when we respond to the call of God, and we do as he's called us to do, to repent, to be immersed, to give everything we are to him, and to follow him, it's the same call that Abram had. And we may not have to physically travel, but we still are traveling. We're wandering in this world. We're strangers here, and we're on our way. And just like Abram, do we know how long it's going to take before we get there? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to die tonight on the way home and enter glory. I don't know if Jesus is going to come back tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to have another 10 years or two, right? And neither do you. We don't know. But we're still told to go by faith, right? So in a very real way, do you see that we're meant to, in a sense, reenact the same journey that Abram had? It's a journey of faith. You have to, by faith, go, right? We have to go by faith. Any other parallels that you could think about? Abram didn't know who he was going to meet on the way, what challenges he was going to face, and neither do we. We don't know who we're going to meet on the way. We don't know how many challenges or anything. We just know God is going with us. Has God promised us some blessings if we go? He promised Abram some blessings. What blessings do we have if we respond to the gospel call? We have a land, right? A figurative land, right? We've got glory. Eternal life.
You have protection and security.
Very similar to what Abram had, right? I'm with you, I'll bless you, and all of that kind of stuff. There'll be blessings for us.
You know, if the Lord had told Abraham from the very beginning, not only what part of that the blessing is going to require, at some point in time, I'm going to ask you to give up your son. You know, if we knew at the beginning of the journey some of the things, you know, if it wasn't by faith, we would never be able to make this.
It'd be a lot, yeah.
I mean, if Abraham knew that
You might say no.
this is where your faith is going to take you to
Right.
that big moment when he was, you know, I mean,
Yeah?
I just,
No, you're right. We talked last week about the people of the Tower of Babel and that city there, that they wanted to make a name for themselves. And God says to Abram, I'm going to make a name for you. I'm going to make your name great. So Proverbs 29:23 says, one's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. James chapter 4 verse 10 says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. And here we have that example of that exactly. Abraham, as far as we know, is a lowly man. He's humble and God says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to do that. So we get a glimpse of that in reality working out. The world is going to be blessed through Abram. Did God fulfill that promise? That all the world would be blessed through Abram?
yes.
Absolutely. And we see that fulfilled in Jesus, right? Galatians chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. So then, those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. So we see that promise was fulfilled. It was pointing us to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ has come, and all of that, all the world can be blessed through him. All the nations of the people are blessed through him. Verses 4 through 6, Abram heads off, and he travels from Haran to Canaan, and then to Shechem to the oak of Moreh, or Moreh. Now when Abram arrives in the land, what happens?
The Lord appeared to him.
The Lord appeared to him. Yeah, he appears to him again. And what does he say?
I'll give this land to your offspring.
I'm going to give this land. So there's a bit more to the promise now, right? I'm going to give this land, right? So does Abram know at this point, okay, we've kind of completed this journey pretty much, right? At least in this land, or, well, he knows this land is going to be the land, right? He doesn't know, again, how far or where else he might have to travel, but this is the land for his descendants. And how old is Abram and Sarah, or Sarai? Anybody know?
75 or something?
Yes, 75, yeah. 75, and bonus question, Sarai is, and I only know this because I looked it up and made sure I knew. How old was Sarai at this time?
65.
65, good job. I had to make sure I was right. Double check. Now, is Abram able at 75 years old to have children at this time?
Yes,
Okay, why do you say yes?
because a little while later he did.
Well, that's true. Naturally, because we know it's miraculous, right? Miraculously with Sarai. anyways. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was after this time,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think, was that miraculous?
No, that one wasn't.
Okay,
Nope.
so,
Nope.
yeah.
With Abram and Sarai. Yeah. Yeah. Does that seem strange to us? Do you know many 75-year-old men who are having children? Every once in a while, right? Every once in a while. But we also have to remember that this is a period of time. I mean, how old was Terah when he had Abram, according to the math that we did? 130, right? He was 130 years old. So remember, back at this period of time, it's certainly possible. He was an old man, but he wasn't quite at the end of that period of time where he could no longer have children, at least according to what we find others around that period of time. But what's happening with...
No, I was just gonna say that when we look at a person in here as 130, 45, that's more like 30 or 40,
Right, yeah.
according to their age spans.
That's right, because the age spans are different. And this is a period of time where that's starting to shrink, though, right? We are actually at that transition period where things are, after the flood, people began to live shorter and shorter and shorter and so. So he's still able to have children, again, and I think you bring up a great point. He's probably, 40, you know what I mean? Like within that kind of range. So he's still able to have children at that time. So it's not a big deal. What is the big deal? What's the big deal about having children? Again, we'll go back to this. It's Sarai, right? It's his wife is the issue, not him. So don't think he was 75 years old. He could never have had children anyways. No, it really had to do with the idea that his wife couldn't do it. And Kimberly brought up some points about Ishmael and all that. And so all that's valid in there. So he's probably, 40, to comparable people today, something like that. Now, when God speaks to him, what does Abram do? God speaks to him, says, this is the land that you're going to have for your children. They're going to inherit the land. And what does Abram do right away?
I think he moves to a spot that he wants to be.
You think he moves to a spot he wants to be at? Like,
Move to the hills.
this is the home. This is the home. Not quite sure that's what he does. That's a good thought, though. That might be what I do, though. Like, hey, Lord, this is a beautiful, lush area. This is where I'm going to set up shop. He goes up on a mountain and somebody said it, he builds an altar, right? And what are altars for? They're for worship. So what does this tell us about Abram? What kind of a man is Abram?
He's a righteous man.
He's godly. He's righteous. He's a worshiper. He's a worshiper of Yahweh, right? He gets in the land, God appears to him again, and the very first thing he does is he builds an altar. When Noah came off the ark, him and his family, what was one of the first things we see them do? Sacrifice. They had to build an altar. They build an altar, they sacrifice, they worship. So he's a worshiper. I'm in the land. This is where you've brought me. I'm going to worship to you. I'm going to sacrifice to you. So he's a man of faith. We know that already because he leaves without knowing anything. He goes. He leaves everything behind him, and he goes. And we know that he's a worshiper because the first thing he does when God appears to him again, when he's in the land, he sets up a little altar to the Lord, and he sacrifices. He worships to Yahweh. So already we have a couple important things that we need to keep in mind about the man Abram. And in fact, some things that we can learn as well, right? Some things we can think about in our own lives. If we want to, we probably should be thinking about, wow, how can I imitate Abram? I want to be like Abram. I want to be a man or a woman of faith. I want to be a worshiper, one who truly honors and worships the God of the universe. We're out of time for tonight, but is there anything on your mind, anything you can think of, anything you want to mention in here? Ice cream man? Oh, don't buy from that. Well, you better bring the ice cream truck, because we might be having ice cream at the end of Bible study every week. God calls us to the same road that Abram was called to. When you walk by faith, when you worship God, when you do all of that, it's an Abrahamic faith. It's an Abrahamic faith. And you are an example to me and to others, as Abram was an example and is an example for us today. Go and do the hard thing. Go and do the hard thing. And be that example and be that encouragement to other people. Do you realize that you're an example? Do you realize that? Do we remember? I wonder. Contemplate that truth, because we're looking at Abram, and we're not just looking at Abram to say we've got some facts about him and we can know some trivia about him. We want to look at him and say, how does he reflect the kind of person that we want to be, that we are called to be? We're called to be just like him. But you are an example to other people. You need to recognize that. Remember that. Paul will even say to people, follow me as I follow Christ. Follow me as I follow Christ. We are examples to the world and to our friends and to the people in the community here and to one another. Go be that great example. Be that person of faith. And if you need more, if you need a mentor, check out Abram and see him, and look at Paul, and then look around and see others who are living out, even in the midst of hardships, who are living out a Christ-like life. Important things to think about. But you're an example. You're an example. All right. Anybody else? If not, Mike, can you close us?